Did you know 94% of flamethrower operators died on Iwo Jima?
Out of 380 flamethrower operators sent onto the black sands of Iwo Jima, only 18 made it out alive. That's not a statistic. That's a death sentence. These weren't just soldiers, they were walking infernos, carrying 70 pounds of fuel and steel on their backs. Each one lit up the battlefield like a beacon, and every Japanese machine gun zeroed in. They had a life expectancy of just 4 minutes. But they also carried the most feared weapon in the Pacific theater. A weapon that could clear bunkers, caves, and tunnels in seconds. A weapon so brutal, even enemy troops would rather die than be taken alive by it. It was both a blessing and a curse. Today, we're stepping into one of the most horrifying chapters of World War II. Not from the sky or the shore, but from inside the suit of a flamethrower operator on Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was just 8 square miles of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No lush jungle, no thriving cities, just ash, cliffs, and silence. But in 1945, this silent island was the most expensive piece of real estate in the world. The reason? Location. Iwo Jima sat like a dagger between the US air bases in the Marianas and mainland Japan. Every time an American B-29 took off to bomb Tokyo, it had to fly right over this island. Japanese fighters and radar stations on Iwo Jima turned those bombers into sitting ducks. If the US could take it, they'd have a forward base, a place for damaged bombers to land, fighter escorts to refuel, and shorter-range missions to launch with heavier payloads. The Japanese knew this. They knew losing Iwo Jima meant the gates to Japan were swinging wide open. So they didn't just plan to defend it, they planned to bleed for it. Every inch of Iwo Jima would be a trap. Every grain of black sand would be a weapon. And by the time the US Marines realized it, it was already too late. On paper, the US invasion looked like a guaranteed win. The Navy had bombarded Iwo Jima for days. Entire cliff faces were ripped apart, pillboxes flattened, smoke and fire blackened the landscape. By the time the first wave of Marines hit the beach, it looked like nothing could have survived. But underground, tens of thousands had. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had studied every mistake Japan had made in the Pacific. He knew surface defenses crumbled under American naval firepower, so he built something else, a fortress buried inside the island itself. Over 11 miles of tunnels were carved through Iwo Jima's soft volcanic rock. Dugouts, artillery chambers, supply routes, sniper nests, all hidden, connected and reinforced. No part of the island was truly cleared because the enemy could vanish below ground and reappear behind you. Kuribayashi had turned the island into a breathing, living maze. Every beach was pre-measured. Every likely landing zone was zeroed in. Machine gun nests and mortar teams didn't fight in isolation. They watched each other's backs from hidden angles, overlapping fire across terrain the Marines had never seen before. There were no front lines, no safe zones, just a black hell beneath their boots. And the Japanese defenders? They weren't waiting on the beach. They were waiting beneath it, February 19th, 1945. The moment the landing craft dropped their ramps, US Marines hit the black sands expecting chaos. But for the first hour, there was silence. No bullets, no mortars. Just the unnatural quiet of soft volcanic ash swallowing their boots. They scrambled to unload, to dig in, to move forward. But there was nowhere to hide. The ash was too loose to build cover. Vehicles stalled, men bunched together, radio lines tangled. Then, right as the beaches were packed elbow to elbow with Marines, the island woke up. Kuribayashi gave the order. From hidden cliffs, caves, and unseen trenches, the Japanese opened fire. Machine guns, mortars, artillery, all pre-sighted and dialed in. The beach turned into a slaughter zone. Entire squads were wiped out in seconds. There were no clear targets, no battle lines to push. Every step forward meant stepping into another kill zone, another hidden nest, another angle of death. And yet, inch by inch, the Marines advanced. But the deeper they pushed, the more they realized this wasn't a battlefield. It was a trap, one they'd have to crawl through, bleed through, and burn through, if they had any hope of making it off the island alive. The deeper the Marines pushed into Iwo Jima, the more the island seemed to swallow them. Bunkers that had been cleared came back to life minutes later. Japanese soldiers reappearing from behind, firing from the very spots Marines had just secured. It didn't make sense until they realized what was happening. The Japanese were moving underneath them. The tunnel network let troops travel unseen beneath the battlefield, surfacing through hidden trapdoors and firing ports. You couldn't hold ground. You could only survive it. That's when the flamethrower became the weapon of choice. Grenades and satchel charges could collapse an opening, maybe. But unless you got every soldier inside, they'd just crawl through a side tunnel and return. The flamethrower was different. Fire didn't just kill, it consumed. It reached around corners, forced air out of lungs, and turned an entire position into a furnace. But wielding one came at a cost. To use it, you had to get close. Close enough to smell the bunker, close enough to be seen. And on Iwo Jima, the moment a flamethrower operator appeared on the battlefield, he became the #1 target. Enemy marksmen didn't hesitate. Pillboxes shifted fire. Even the dead seemed to rise just to stop the man carrying fire. And yet over and over again, these men walked into the heat, not because they wanted to, but because no one else could. The weapon that struck fear into both sides was called the M2-2 flamethrower. It looked like a small metal backpack with a hose, but inside, it carried death. 2 large tanks of thickened gasoline, 1 smaller tank of compressed nitrogen, a wand-like tube with an igniter at the end. Pull the trigger and you got a stream of fire stretching 20 to 25 yards. But that fire only lasted 7 seconds. That's it. 7 seconds of life or death. Operators were trained to fire in 1 or 2 second bursts. Anything longer wasted fuel or risked overheating. After those few bursts, you had to fall back, reload, or switch tanks, assuming you were still alive. Each unit weighed over 70 pounds, even more when crawling through ash or climbing rocks. There were no spare hands to fire a rifle, no time to duck and aim. You were exposed, slower, louder, and once that flame lit up, everyone knew where you were. The noise, the heat, the recoil, it all shook the operator's body. And unlike a gun, you didn't just point and shoot. You aimed, advanced, and watched what happened up close. There's a reason flamethrower operators weren't just killed when captured. They were executed. To the Japanese, these men weren't soldiers. They were monsters. They brought the kind of death that stripped you of dignity. Fire didn't leave wounds. It erased bodies. And on a battlefield where surrender was rare to begin with, flamethrower troops became the most hated enemy of all. The Japanese made sure everyone knew it. If you were spotted carrying the M2, you weren't just shot at. Entire units shifted their focus to kill you first. Pillboxes turned, snipers adjusted, mortars re-angled. You became the match they had to stomp out. And if they caught you, a bullet to the head would have been merciful. One Marine's weapon jammed just as he approached a cave. 2 Japanese soldiers dragged him inside. His squad heard his screams for 2 days. There was nothing they could do. No way to reach him, and no way to forget what they heard. Survivors didn't just walk away with physical scars. They carried memories of what they'd seen and done, because the flamethrower didn't offer emotional distance. It wasn't like dropping a bomb or firing a shell. You saw it all, up close. The burning, the screaming, the smell. Some called it necessary, Others called it a war crime with a uniform. But for the men crawling through Iwo Jima's nightmare, there wasn't time to debate morality. There was only one question: who goes in first? And too often the answer was the guy with the flamethrower. Eventually the numbers were impossible to ignore. Too many flamethrower operators were dying. 7 seconds of fire wasn't worth a 4-minute life expectancy. So, the Marines rolled out something new, something that could survive long enough to deliver the burn. The M4A3R3 Sherman Zippo, a tank that didn't shoot shells. It breathed flame. These modified Shermans replaced their main gun with a flamethrower system. Instead of carrying 70 pounds on a soldier's back, they carried 300 gallons of thickened fuel behind several inches of steel. They could fire up to 100 yards, tripling the M2's range and clearing entire tunnel entrances in seconds. From a distance, they looked like ordinary tanks, but the moment they fired, everything changed. A dragon's roar of pressure and fire exploded forward, and even the most fortified bunkers couldn't withstand it. But being inside a metal box filled with fuel wasn't exactly safe. The Japanese knew what those tanks could do. Once they opened fire, the entire battlefield lit them up. Anti-tank teams, explosives, suicide squads, everyone wanted the fire-breathing beasts silenced. Still, they were the most effective bunker busters on the island, and they helped finish what the infantry couldn't. Only 18 flamethrower operators walked off Iwo Jima alive. That's not just a number, that's a whisper in the deafening roar of history. 18 men survived one of the most horrifying roles in modern warfare. And yet, most people have never heard their story. There are no statues for them, no textbooks highlighting their names, because the weapon they carried wasn't one that made heroes, it made ghosts. What they did was brutal. Necessary, maybe, but scarring, inside and out. Many of them never spoke about what they saw. Some couldn't. Others simply chose to bury it, like the tunnels they once crawled through. Their trauma didn't end when the fighting stopped. For many, it followed them home. Nightmares, guilt, silence. That's what came with carrying a weapon that could melt steel and end lives in seconds. But without them, the island might never have been taken. Their sacrifice turned the tide of a war that demanded everything. They cleared the way when no one else could. They burned through darkness to create a path forward, and for that, they deserve more than a passing mention. They deserve to be remembered, because sometimes the ones who carried the fire are the ones history tries hardest to forget. If you found this story worth remembering, hit subscribe. We've got more untold war stories coming that you won't believe.